Good evening. Good evening. Thanks for coming out this evening. Welcome to this evening's special event with fine art photographer and educator Catherine Opie, who is joined by curator and writer Charlotte Cotton. Please be sure and join us at the Catherine and Tom Belk Visual Arts Center following this conversation, where you can enjoy Catherine's important work, including the official portrait of President Emerita Carol Quillen. Who will introduce tonight's special guests. I want to share just a little bit about the role of the arts at Davidson. We are so fortunate to have extraordinary students and faculty across the disciplines of studio art, theater, music, dance, and the literary arts. And it's impossible to visit our campus and not interact with the arts in some form. From creation to performance and every avenue in between, the arts are a huge part of our campus culture, and I'm thrilled that we have the opportunity to host leading artists like Catherine Opie and Charlotte Cotton, who continue to shape the ways we learn and who challenge us to think in new ways about the communities and societies in which we live. I'm proud of the ways Davidson brings art to campus and to our region. And I'm also honored to introduce my predecessor and my friend, President Emerita Carol Quillen, who had so much to do with bringing the arts up to speed and to the quality where it is now at Davidson. In her 11-year tenure as president of Davidson, she focused on the arts, and you can see visible ways in which she transformed the campus, not just through the sculpture and the other art across campus, but through our faculty, and through the composition of our students, and through our connections with the whole region of Charlotte and beyond. It's really my honor to welcome back to campus President Emerita Carol Quillen.
Thank you so much, President Hicks. As usual, I will fail to live up to the kind words with which I was introduced, but I am super happy to be back at Davidson and to see so many friends and this beautiful campus and this incredible place. I think I have the honor of introducing our speakers tonight because I was lucky enough to have Catherine Opie, Kathy, do my presidential portrait. And I just want to say a few words about why that was so important to me and why I'm so grateful to Allison Mose, who's here, and the Board of Trustees who made that experience possible. I really wanted a photograph, in part because of the kind of art form that photography represents. And I'm not an art critic, and I don't know the right language to describe it, but it seems to me that a photograph oddly combines serendipity and artistry and a little staging. And that in all of those things, there's an unrepeatable moment, right, between what's being photographed and the photographer. And the serendipity of that experience seemed really fitting to my experience at Davidson, to the role of president during the time that I was here. So a photograph, it meant a lot to me to be able to have a photographic portrait as opposed to a oil painting portrait. And it really meant a lot to me that Catherine Opie was the person who agreed to do this. For one, Davidson will have this incredibly important photographer represented in the collection, which will in the end be much more important than who is in the photo. So I'm super grateful about that. But there's also other reasons why I'm happy that she agreed to do this for me and for Davidson. She likes Holbein, and I'm an early modern historian. So thinking about the way that Holbein painted in the 16th century gave me a kind of connection to her work. Her work also holds your attention. If you look at it, you might look away, but then you're going to look back and you're going to be captivated by something about it. I kind of think it's the way light works in her photographs. And then I think her bodies of work tend to explore the relationship between some sort of context, community and identity in ways that are really powerful. So maybe it's landscapes emptied of people, maybe it's freeways, surfers, ice houses, her friends in LA. That interplay of context, community, and identity seems always at play. And again, that seemed an important aspect of what it meant to me, the incredible gift of being president of this extraordinary place. So I'm really happy that Kathy's here, and I'm grateful to be back here, and I can't wait to see the exhibition. And now I'm going to introduce them as I was meant to do. For more than 30 years, Catherine Opie has captured often overlooked aspects of contemporary American life and culture. One of the most important photographers of her generation, her photographic subjects have included early seminal portraits of the LGBTQ plus community, the architecture of Los Angeles freeway system, mansions in Beverly Hills, Midwestern ice houses, high school football players, California surfers, abstract landscapes of national parks, the Bel Air residences of Elizabeth Taylor, among others. In 2018, Opie debuted her first film, The Modernist, a dystopic view of Los Angeles, a city that has figured prominently in her work over the years. Her complex and diverse body of work is political, personal, and aesthetic. The formal, conceptual, and documentary are always at play. Her work has been exhibited extensively at institutions worldwide, and we at Davidson are fortunate beyond words to join this list. She lives in Los Angeles and is professor emeritus at UCLA. Catherine is joined tonight by Charlotte Cotton, a curator, writer, and creative consultant who has explored photographic culture for more than 25 years. She has held positions including curator of photographs at the Victoria and Albert Museum, head of programming at the Photographers Gallery in London, curator and head of the Wallace Annenberg Department of Photography at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and curator in residence at Katona Museum of Art in New York. Her book, The Photograph as Contemporary Art, is published in more than 10 languages and has been a key text in charting the rise of photography as an undisputed art form in the 21st century. Please help me welcome Catherine Opie and Charlotte Cotton.
Really glad that she likes her portrait. That's always the scariest thing about making portraits. Oh, did I sit on my mic? I did.
Hello, Kathy. It is really great to be here with you and to extend the conversation about your exhibition in dialogue, which we started with the essay for the exhibition catalogue, which is beautiful, stunning, and available for free in the exhibition. I prepared a few questions which you chose not to hear in advance, so they're going to be
like being surprised, like being fresh.
And once I've given you just 4 questions, we're going to move on to questions from the audience, and we've got 2 mics here and here. So we're going to aim to have our conversation for about 35 minutes, and then I think Leah is going to kind of give me a flag up and we'll open up to questions. And then, of course, in the spirit of your In Dialogue exhibition, the conversations continue in the gallery. So we're going to try and I'm going to try and keep to the time. We arrived last night from Los Angeles. And we had a really great day. It's a beautiful place to be. It's the first time I've been to Davidson, and I think I wanted to start by just describing the exhibition so that I can sort of succinctly say what the exhibition is, so we don't spend too much time with that, but also my response to the exhibition. And first of all, I wanted to say that it feels, what really impresses me about Davidson is the relationship with being with, inside and out, with art. It feels such a special place where art has a place in building the environment of education. And to have your exhibition here makes perfect sense. And I've enjoyed every single conversation I've had about art at Davidson College, all of which so far have been with Leah, who's the and well, okay, so I get it. You feel as fond of Leah as I do in the conversations I've had. And I've worked in the cultural industries and in cultural institutions for actually 30 years. I play it down so you don't know exactly how old I am, but it is actually 30 years that I've worked. And I can really tell the difference between curators and directors of art galleries who talk the talk, who kind of do a performative version of accessibility to art, and those who are the real deal. The definition of being a curator is to take care and to make really special things for other people. And so maybe we start with a round of applause for Leah, because it's such an incredible person. As a result, it doesn't surprise me that Davidson is the location for this unique first and very special exhibition in dialogue, which has at the center of the exhibition a series called 2020, which is a series of photographic diptychs. Diptychs, I say that, and maybe we come to that if we get to the point of photo geeking. But as I think I said to you when I came to interview you to write the essay, the diptych is a much maligned kind of form of photography. It's kind of a little bit dated, but the way that you use it, which is so indicative of who you are, it's a story which is structured as the classic photographic road trip. And it's set within the summer of 2020. And it is a series, the true life experience of that period of time, which is it's full of contrasts and it's full of contradictions. And so there is that sort of perfect meeting of form with really this account, this bearing witness to a really crucial year within American history. I guess I don't need to list it out, but I will. But we're talking about COVID-19 pandemic, the police shootings, say their names, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. The Black Lives Matter led coming onto the streets, and the removal and the reinscribing, especially in this region of America, of Confederate monuments, all of which is being played out in the exhibition in dialogue. You use the classic photo road trip. And again, I think this is something we will come to, but that's something that cuts through all of your work, which is claiming and reassigning these kind of classic photo gestures to really take account of this moment in time. And you traveled in an RV from Los Angeles, your home, to Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then made an additional trip to Portland, Oregon, following the energy of activism and resistance in 2020. And maybe it's the most photographic work in the show. And then possibly the most architectonic work is Monumental, which are these 7 large frames, which really nearly knocked me off my feet today. I'd seen the work, I'd seen it when you were pinning it up in the studio in 2021, and it's a remarkable work of art. And it's so great to see it within the context here and to think about what it means to monumentalize a period of American history, as well as the conversation around the Confederate monuments. What I felt about it today, and again, this is really the magic of your work and the accessibility and the openness, is I can only say this in terms of my response to your work, but you leave the door wide open for everyone to have a response to the work. But I felt like I was really thinking about what it means to monumentalize this extremely mercurial moment, and whether it was a moment of endings or beginnings, or the death rattle of something or the beginning of something. It all seems to be very much in dialogue within the exhibition. There are also included in the exhibition these two freestanding screens, which are untitled Political Landscapes, one in the exhibition and one in the library, which was such a lovely moment when we, with Leah, came into the library, and there's literally somebody who I think is probably here tonight who hopefully is going to ask a question, because Kathy asked him to ask a question.
I don't know if he showed up or not.
But he was just like literally engaging with your work, and we walk in and then it's like this little bit of magic. So the possibilities of having incidental or unexpected relationships with
Yeah, I smile too.
but these screens are showing your animations, your animated collages of all of these found photographs from what I guess we call legacy media nowadays, right? And shaping these kind of visual languages into the sort of major thematics of life, whether it's climate crisis or gun violence. And then there's a separate viewing room in the gallery for The Modernist, which is your animation, your film from 2016, which is truly one of my favorite works of art by you, because, I mean, for lots of reasons. One of them is that I think, I mean, as somebody who's a real devotee of your work and thinks of it as incredibly special, I also think that as a great artist, you push against the pressure to be known for one thing and to be somebody who's simply about kind of preserving that kind of representation of yourself. And The Modernist, I saw you as an artist who takes enormous risks in your own terms. I mean, not in terms of it being a great work of art, but to move away from what is expected of you. And you're working with your longtime friend and collaborator, Pigpen, who plays this protagonist in this story. And for me, it's a story about what is the role of artists in a time as disruptive and mercurial and as dangerous as now. So it's a beautiful kind of ode to being an artist, which again, I think is, I mean, I felt that very much in the introduction to your work that Carol gave, that, you know, artists almost divide into two categories: those who do one thing, or a recognizable signature style, or a singular subject which they explore in beautiful detail, and other artists who really roam. And that leads me to my first question to you.
Now I guess I have to talk. Okay.
Now we're all on the same
Yes, I was really enjoying this.
Now get to work. So my first question to you, I mean, is really about, I mean, I've just spent a long time giving my response in dialogue, so I'm really interested in how it reads to you today in 2024, given, of course, that we're talking about a show again, which is all credits to Davidson, which is a show which the meaning or the dialogues that will happen within it may shift over the time that this show happens, which is until February 2025. So I think I'm really interested to know how you feel about the show and what you feel can happen or will happen in the meaning of this show.
I mean, what was so interesting about listening to you, besides just your kind of constant, I appreciate so much that you look so deeply at my work, first and foremost. I thank the college for bringing this exhibition, because this is the first time that 2020 has ever been shown. And so it's a body of work that I made that the galleries, you know, were not necessarily that interested in. And I vacillate between kind of really what is a place of documentary and how does it occupy us and what is our relationship to it and how do we create history through making images. And this has always been the impetus behind making work forever for me. And so saying the dates was interesting because 2016, when I started The Modernist, that was at the same time that Hillary and Trump were running against each other. And The Modernist was not necessarily a response to that time, but because of what was happening, it ended up being edited into that. It was originally a 90s piece that I had imagined that I always wanted to make in conversation with Chris Marker around La Jetée. And so then like these markers from 2016 to then rhetorical landscapes, which you have the political collages that I then did with the swamps. What's not in the exhibition was a whole series of landscapes of swamps throughout the South that went with the political collages. Because what is the rhetoric of our time? Rhetorical landscape, the notion of drain the swamp. And we're still hearing the same rhetoric today. So then from that then to 2020, and now here we are with the first exhibition of it 4 years later, 20 some days away from a major election in which this country is going to change. And so one of the things about making work, and this is to get to your question, is that when you decide to make work, you don't know what's going to happen in history. You don't know that Trump is going to run again. You don't know, like, if he's going to lose. You don't know what's going to happen. So what you're doing with a camera is trying to respond to the way that you're feeling in relationship to the country and trying to make something out of it that is important with what you're constantly hearing binging off of things. It often feels like we ourselves now are just cellular towers. The cellular towers are out there, but we ourselves now have things coming at us in such a rapid way that we've become the towers ourselves. So in order to kind of create a different kind of order for myself as a human being, I choose to use a camera and try to figure out what is this in terms of creating metaphors, but also documenting the times that we live in. Again, it's not necessarily a documentation that everybody is going to feel connected to, but without creating language, we have no way of understanding how to look at things deeper within our culture. And so my language is not through novels, but through the images that I put out in relationship to the times that I live in.
I mean, I guess that the sort of follow-on question from that is acknowledging that, you know, as an artist who's written into the history of contemporary art,
Yeah.
You would be most strongly identified with, I mean, a period, you know, as always since the 80s that you've been an activist and political activist, mainly within your LGBTQ plus community, but still that's part of what drives and motivates your work, but really in the genre of portraiture and this notion of photography's power to be seen and to see others like you, and that being something which is sort of undilutable and undeniable and has had this kind of very, very direct, sometimes very literal, but very, very direct impact on what we give permission, what we give contemporary art permission to speak about and to activate real cultural discussion or change. And it's lesser known, I think, the work that you've been doing really since you were a student in terms of thinking about architecture, whether that's queer architecture or a city's architecture.
Or a country's architecture.
In
The relationship to identity is always within every body of work. But it is mapped out to understand that identity is also not fixed. And so in relationship to the kind of cacophony, I guess, of styles or information that I tend to play with in relationship to the diversity of the bodies of work are because that is to try to touch every little moment of language within our society. It's to try to reach to a deeper humanity and an understanding. And I never really wanted to be anybody that, you know, I think that queerness in itself was transgressive. And I decided to be transgressive within the language of queerness that was presented to me from the world more so than my own transgression internally. So I think there's a lot to begin to talk about in terms of how we create representations and our ability to have language be as complicated as identity, and then also the reflection of history. And I think that that is profoundly part of who I was growing up in Sandusky, Ohio as a kid. You know, is profoundly like because of my own, like born in 1961 and what I grew up with as a representation of America, especially Vietnam War, the assassination of Kennedy, the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have to realize that this is all from 1961 on. La Jetée was made in 1962, Chris Marker's film. So the relationship of our history has to be invoked in a certain way by what you were talking about, by the road trip, or by what those things are, because they are ubiquitous to American identity as well.
One of the through lines that I think impacts whatever genre hopping you're doing.
The genre hopper.
Yes, exactly. Shapeshifter is the criteria that I suspect, and we've talked about this before, but I suspect that you have in your decision making of where you go with this at particular moments, which of course is shaped by the political context of what we are all living through, let alone what you personally are living through. And that is the sense of urgency. Like for me, that cuts across every body of work, regardless of what the ostensible subject is what's the most urgent thing for me to bear witness to. Do you agree?
I mean, I think that we're in a crisis as this country, and that's why the diptych is used as a format in relationship to this, because if a diptych can create a dialogue in relationship to division. I grew up in a Republican household. You know, I grew up in a time where political discourse was in such a way that felt very different than what I've been witnessing over, you know, the last almost, you know, a decade at this point. And I'm very concerned with how we are going to get to a better position of humanity in relationship with this country, because I've never thought that we were a perfect democracy anyway. I think that there's lots to talk about in relationship to what democracy is and how we begin to look at it. But I have never seen in growing up through all of this moment, the kind of discourse that we have going on in a constant barrage. And I don't know how to bear witness to it except for by going out and exploring. You know, you have to wander. I really believe in wandering. There's a great book by Rebecca Solnit, which is The Field Guide to Getting Lost. And it's one of my favorite books, because this notion of what it is to wander and to be lost and to be bearing witness and to try to collect, because what a photographer does is collect their impressions of what they're looking at. And then they have to go back and they have to edit. The collecting is one part, but then the editing and making sense of the body of work is a completely different aspect to it. And so there also then happens with different sets of language within the making process, because there's the collecting first, and then there's the making sense of what you've collected.
Yes. I mean, I was going to save this as my backup question if literally nobody had a question. But I think you've actually brought it forward. I've just finished reading The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is astounding. And there are many things to say, but there are two elements which I take out of it that just resonated with what you just said. The first is that he talks in the introduction about the job he's talking about of a writer, and to a certain extent a journalist, is you have to walk the land. And I think that for me, 2020 is very much that form of decision making, that you can't abstract this. You have to put your feet on the ground to understand what is happening.
Well, it's like in the first social media image that shows up in the 2020 diptychs. I don't know if it's in the selected in this exhibition or not from the body of work. There is the, it hit Facebook and Instagram, the image of the Robert E. Lee in Richmond, Virginia, just as the graffiti had started on it, just as it had become a real political activist site. And to watch this kind of activism take place within the country after being part of ACT UP and Queer Nation and so forth was really important as well. As a senior activist, I felt that not a senior activist, but an elder, I guess, and had gone through that it was important for me to be in the streets as well. But then the streets in LA in relationship to the protests weren't enough. Like my body was one thing, but I also know that my body and my mind in relationship to what does it mean for me also as a white woman to go through the South and bear witness on Confederate monuments of what has been removed and what is remained is also a set of its own complications in relationship to identity. And that needs to be said as well within the body of work. And I think that all of that is all important in relationship to the idea of dialogue as well, that all voices in a certain way have to take precedent to being able to be heard and understood in a place in which language is starting to become repressed and authoritative ideas are actually happening. And we are bearing witness to it as a society and as a voting pool of citizens.
I mean, but there's two obligations or responsibilities that I think cut across all of your activism and take us up to the work of this decade, which is, first of all, is lest we forget that I think, particularly when you're dealing with a bombardment of contradictions and disasters happen, cultural and political disasters happening,
and climate disasters.
You can't even hold it in your head. Like, I mean, in my own life, like my mum's been in hospital this week, and my sister was like, right, today we need to record just what happened in the sequence it happened. And I swear to you, if we hadn't done that, we could not remember what happened last week. It's one of those moments where really photography's capacity and your capacity as somebody who bears witness is really important to however we conclude this ongoing story. But the second thing, which also comes from, it comes from Audre Lorde via Ta-Nehisi Coates, which was the other thing that came to mind for me, which is he talks about the imperative of getting to clarity. I mean, in his case, in journalism, but I feel that that's what you're doing with photography. I mean, I'm not saying that means you have every right. You're not speaking for anyone else. You are just going through the process of trying to get clear, trying to understand what is happening, and visually is the way that you do that with photography.
Yeah, I think that is really true, that I'm not trying to really dictate my vision as the right vision. It's a vision, it's my vision, it's what I'm trying to think about as language. It's very, even though I know that I am at an artist at this point, have been incredibly fortunate that I do have audiences. I mean, I do make bodies of work that actually never really go out there as well. And that's okay for me as well, because it is about the act of my own relationship to my ideas and my curiosity and what I want to leave as a mark for myself as well as an audience. But I think for the most part, it's to serve my own curiosity and veracity of what it means to make images. And just, it goes back to the fact that I frickin' said that I was going to be a social documentary photographer at the age of 9 because of Lewis Hine. I mean, what child does that? And then I did it. Like, I kept doing it. Like, I kept making pictures since I was 9 years old, And it's the only thing that makes sense to me in relationship to how to make a larger sense of the world that I inhabit in this body and in this place and in this time. So, but I'm really glad that there's an audience.
Well,
I feel
yes.
very fortunate about that.
Yes, but also there's real work there in terms of your anticipation of where that places us as viewers of your work. And what I mean by that is I'd never describe your work as didactic. I mean, it's informed and it's clear to me. And you're asking me to remember that this happened at the same time as this, and this happened at the same time as well. And so there's information there, but it isn't didactic. And I think that feels, I mean, especially resonant in America, in this kind of horseshoe kind of coexistence of extremes in one place and one time. And anyway, I'd love you to talk more about that, about how you swerve kind of sledgehammering what it is that you're thinking through.
I think a lot about what is being produced contemporarily in relationship to the language of any given moment. And that's through reading and watching and looking at every single kind of resource through all different kinds of media. And then I begin to understand certain relationships of what begins to be iconic as a language, or what begins to be cliche, and what begins to be repeated, and what begins to get lost within our culture. And I try to slither in between all those places, I suppose, where I don't want to be cliche, but I want to rub up against it. I want to create a different kind of iconic, a way for us to enter something that we hadn't necessarily thought of in that way before, and what kind of image begins to do that. So it's really the more complex nature of kind of the linguistic struggles of representation, both, I think, through writing and imagery, that I'm trying to negotiate in any given time with any given body of work, but that the politic and that the notion of humanity is in the personal tries to be embedded within each one of those as a specificity as well.
It's really, as you're saying that, I'm thinking it's really important that the animated collages are part of this exhibition. And I wonder if you could say more about that, in terms of whether it does feel like it's sort of following a through line, and as it happens, they're found photographs, clipped from National Geographic or Time magazine, or what's the relationship with that? Because that's a distinctly different way of making
photography
work.
is pretty much primarily known through us at this point, through our devices, as well as, but it started out through magazines, right? We would sit at home and we would flip through the magazines. We'd dream about what kind of outfit we might be able to afford, or we would get some source of information. Maybe we'd read an article, but let's face it, most of us just looked at the pictures, right? We did. We looked at the pictures. Remember when the Sears catalog, I'm dating myself now, would come to the house. Like, I'm really dating myself now. But images were the first kind of position of also what children learn. Like, images do everything for us. That is the way that we begin to depict in our relationship to the world through that. And for me, with the collages, it's also something, the fact that why they're shown on these oversized mall monitors, which are actually bought on Amazon, by the way, but they closely resembled the first generation of the iPhone, and that's why I like them. And so I've cut all these images out for about a 1.5 year period of time from a whole cross-section of magazines to begin to make political collages, thinking about literally Hannah Hock, and the relationship to photography and collage and Bauhaus. And so again, like bringing in all that kind of information, but that all of a sudden you're dealing with these themes with the politics of our time through these political collages, was also a nod to Terry Gilliam and Monty Python, because that's like what I grew up with as well. So how are we going to take information? One day we're not going to have a moment where we're going, now we can touch an image on our phone and it turns into a sticker. But is then that going to allow us to cut out and make collages? Like there's so many questions about the materiality of where our world is going. And part of the magazine is me wanting to hang on to something, but also take it to another place of reminding people what we will have. Same thing with the modernist. I never would have made the collages in rhetorical landscape without having made the modernist first.
Right.
It follows because of Pigpen's art is making this collage of the houses that they're burning down in Los Angeles. So when you watch it, the story of that is, can I go ahead and say that, or are we running out of time? Do you want me to?
No, carry
Okay.
on.
So one of the things that I wanted to have why I wanted to have a conversation with La Jetée, and you'll notice that I'm doing this for the last 6 years with different medium and different relationship to how I'm making bodies of work right now. Same thing with Walls, Windows, and Blood of the Vatican, which was a recent body of work, is the idea of taking and distilling down this information in a certain way. So La Jetée, made in 1962 by Chris Marker, was about the fear and the proliferation of nuclear weapons. But I feel that we have and so it was his dystopic utopic love story in relationship to that around the Cuban Missile Crisis and what was happening throughout the world. So the modernist is taking the idea of what was at one point affordable housing in LA, of the case study houses and what it was supposed to be, but at a place that we're actually in a post-utopic world to a certain extent. So using modernism as a framework to begin to talk about utopia, but of an artist living in their studio who starts to burn down these most iconic houses in LA that they'll never be able to afford now. And so what is the relationship between that and the haves and the have-nots of what's going on culturally? So throughout it, Pigpen's making this collage because every time the LA Times does a front story newspaper, which I took the newspaper, and it was before fake news actually became a thing because it was 2016 when we weren't even discussing that. And I was reprinting the front of every LA Times and putting it in. So it's half real news of what was happening in the moment when you watch the piece. And it's actually fake news of the houses being burnt down that I did, in my studio through newsprint and paper with scanning. So there is this, there was even a collage in relationship to beforehand. Pigpen's hand of the collage became a Photoshop collage in terms of the misinformation of this person burning down the houses. And that's exactly the kind of world we're living in right now a little bit. It is this kind of way. Do I believe this? Like the LA Times printed this, Kathy's in her studio cutting up. Did these modernist houses really burn down? Like what's going on, And that is, I think, often what we're feeling right now within society as well.
I think so. And obviously I actively choose to live in LA despite being unemployable. But the reason I do is because it has the largest percentage of artists, people with a daily practice. And it's no joke, like nobody thinks very few people, unless they're like 25, think that they're going to be the one to make it. It actually is most people who just don't want to feel stupid and want to feel with other people who get up and have a daily practice, have that sort of discipline. So it doesn't, the piece is really important to me because for somebody who knows what that feels like, it's a piece about, well, what do you do as a creative person at this time? And, do you burn it all down?
And what is utopia to us?
Yeah.
What is that? I mean, we're using this binary all the time. It's so existing in every kind of TV series, film, so forth, this kind of relationship between the dystopic and the utopic.
Yeah.
But it's also as easy as to say heaven and hell in a certain way, but those aren't real things, really, but they're ideas that we keep striving for to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So then what are we going to do with it all is really my question. We're going to burn it all down, I guess.
But there's that. But this is my sort of final point on it, is what I love, and it's really, really in what I try to describe within dialogue, is there's not a fixed position which you as an artist propose that you can think about this. and you can create within it. And that for me is the real beautiful message of your work and your practice, which is just be nimble, choose what is the most urgent thing to take account of and bear witness to. And that is a really incredible creative practice. I think we need to open up for questions.
Thank you, see. Was worth the trip to the library.
Kind of on like what you're talking about, how you are choosing like the most urgent thing that's going on in like the time we're in right now with everything that's going on. How are you like what is the most urgent? Like, because everything at the time, I feel like in media and how it's shown, everything feels like it's the most urgent at the time. So how, like, I don't know exactly what you're working on right now, art wise, but like, how are you choosing like what to focus on in the urgency?
I had to go calm myself down now again, right? Because that's what I do in between work. If you actually really track all my bodies of work, you'll see where I go like really hard into something, questioning it, like really putting it out there. Then all of a sudden I decide to go to Norway in January and February to do a 20-day road trip to photograph mountains that under the blue light of dusk and dawn. So to make portraits of mountains, because who is, these snow, that what's happening with our planet also needs to be portrayed. Mountains in California, everything depends on whether or not we have snow, on what kind of, fire season we're going to have, if we're going to have water or anything. So I think that the question is what is urgent is, also what can I do that will bring me down to a place where I can breathe a little bit too. So I think that that's really important for everybody out there to remember that within all the urgencies of everything that that's flooding us, that a pause, wherever a pause is for you, and wherever you can put yourself in that place is also as important as what is urgent. And so I vacillate within work between those places so that I can find myself again as well in a time that I feel the urgency. But to answer the question also in terms of what is urgent, I think it's that again, your own curiosity, your own individual drive in relationship to what your questions are in life.
Thank you.
So right now, we're in a time where the world is like spasming with global conflict, and there's a violence everywhere. And so photographers have an obligation, I would think, to capture violence so that we can try to understand it and ultimately prevent it. But how do you feel about photographers limiting themselves in capturing violence so that they don't fetishize that subject and turn it into something that we view with like a sort of risky thrill?
That is such a fascinating question, and I appreciate it. And I want Charlotte to handle this too, because as a curator of photography, I think it's really important to understand the relationship between documentary, between journalism, the kind of relationship to an artist that ends up exhibiting often in these places where there isn't violence. I was recently invited to go to Ukraine and begin a body of work in Ukraine. And I was supposed to be there in September. And I decided not to go because at that point, Ukraine pushed into Russia. And I have never been in a war zone. I have been in an uprising. I've watched, LA burn. I have bared witness to those moments. I've had the National Guard aim guns on my body because I went out at night to walk my dog. But it is a really good question. And I think the most interesting part of your question really, I think, stems around what do these images of violence really do for us as human beings? And I think that's the most important aspect of this question. I am so grateful for these journalists in relationship to their images, but after a while, I get worn out too following it. And so I don't know what to do around that, because do I need to see another child dead? Do I need to, and I used some in the collages. There was a moment in which every news article showed the little girl who died in the river, in Texas. And if it was imaged so many different times that ended up obviously in the political collages too. But I think it is about the relationship to imagery and teaching people how to have also criticality in relationship to our culture. And I think when you are educated in how reading images, and this is a great thing the New York Times is doing right now for kids, actually, they have this moment where they have a section where they ask the teacher to have the kids interpret this image. But I think the more that we talk about images and look at images and begin to interpret them, then they might not get easier, but that we also understand that part of reaching a greater humanity, unfortunately, is showing how brutalistic human beings are to one another as well. And I'm so saddened that this goes hand in hand, but I'm also really grateful for those photographers who risk their lives in doing that. Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, at the basis is that photography is implicated in all of the dreadful things that human beings do to each other, right? And I think we are much more sensitive to the fact that this plus this institution plus this set of politics plus this relationship with fake news equals something which dilutes what we would hope is enduring about photography bearing witness, like as we've been talking about today. I would say that my point of view has shifted a lot in the time that I've worked, because I think culture has changed, visual culture has changed. When I started in the 20th century, we had these definable things, it was either or, good or bad, right or wrong. And then the post-internet era, which is where I sort of really creatively came into my own, it's an either and, it's like, it's analog and digital, it's legacy media and Web 2.0, etc. And now we're at this everything moment, which on one level is full of possibilities of where our imaginations and how we tell stories can really develop. And I say I come from photography into this cultural arena. Like we all come from somewhere, and I come good and bad to photography. So it's culturally a very complicated time for photography, and it's been this really rapid, in one lifetime kind of journey. The last 4 years of my life, I was artistic director setting up grant awards and a biennial in Western Asia, in the Gulf. And I've spent the last 4 years mainly working with image makers in the region in Western Asia and North Africa. And I remember coming to the talk you did for your amazing show at Regan Projects about the work in LA, which is this incredible bringing together of everything from your archive. And you can't tell the difference between an ACT UP demonstration and a Black Lives Matter demonstration. It's like repeat, press repeat, human beings, press repeat. And I asked you a question, which is, what do you think photography does at this moment in time? Because it's not that I want to let legacy media off the hook in terms of how they communicate what's happening in the catastrophes across this world. But I also think that the thing that we need to preserve is what photography does. And I'll cry in a minute, but what I learned from people, like I'd be sitting in a room with 90% people who worked for Al Jazeera, who were photographers, who might be producers, journalists, videographers, thinking most of the people in this room have experienced death and war by the time they reached adulthood. And I want their stories. Like, I think that's one way to swerve your suspicion, is photography still does things, and the questions are about in whose hands.
No, it was great. Gonna fangirl out over here. Any more questions?
Mentioned earlier from here. Right
Oh, there
here.
you are.
Sorry.
Sorry, I have a light. You have a light. You're right under the lights.
You've mentioned earlier how you've had a struggle sometimes trying to take yourself out of the chaos. And so I was wondering, was there a fear that so much chaos, so much was kind of happening that your artistic voice got lost a little bit? Or was there a fear that could that voice get lost and get consumed by what is happening in the world? And how did you take yourself out of it whenever it became too much?
That's a good question. Great questions here. I think that it's more also in relationship to my stubbornness around people trying to create an identity of what kind of photographer I am. And I have an incredible stubbornness into this idea of a singular identity. So, but there are moments when I realize, because one of the things that happened early on is for me, the darkroom was the place of peace. I would go into it and days and hours would go by and I'd just be printing these bodies of work because I was very much a technical hands-on photographer. And then I got pregnant with Oliver and I knew that I wasn't allowed to be, around chemistry anymore during my pregnancy. And so I started having other people print for me. And at that time, I started doing ice houses with the 8x10 camera or surfers. And I noticed that the shift within that contemplative time that I would take to think in the darkroom got switched to a place of making. And so I think that in some ways, like I've always been I was a camp counselor forever. I started being a camp counselor when I was 14 and I didn't stop until I was 21. I really liked it. And so I was a sixth grade outdoor education teacher as well, teaching riparian and forestry. So the idea of growing up on Lake Erie and knowing what that was as a landscape for me, and then moving to Poway, California, and knowing the mountains of California and the chaparral have always also been a part of it. And I really want to, have those moments where I can meditate with the camera, but also it is a way for me to remove myself and still bear witness to what I think is an incredibly fragile environment. And it's going to continue to be fragile. And I want to take this time to say that, I really know that what you're going through here in North Carolina was a really intense moment. And as it is in other states, and I know from living in California and going through major fires and stuff that, all of us are living in a time that we are seeing our planet change in very big ways. And so part of the meditative thing is to understand that when, somebody like Donald Trump uses the language, drain the swamp, you don't actually want to do that, that it's one of the most important ecosystems around. And so by going and photographing swamps instead of thinking about draining the swamps is another way to remind people that we need to actually preserve these places and meditate upon them and spend time in them. And especially going to national parks and just racking the focus and making them abstract. That was because I was really tired of people getting out of the car at the Grand Canyon, taking a picture and posting on Instagram and getting in the car and driving off. And what is that really experiencing the Grand Canyon? Like, just for a post, like that made no sense to me. So a lot of the return of that meditative work is to remind people to walk, to wander. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question? I mean, not to put too much pressure.
So you've talked a lot about like urgency and photography's role in like capturing a time and place. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit in regards to your portraiture, and especially like bodies in a space, especially queer and female bodies, and their kind of political nature in this day and age.
Yeah. Yeah, bodies in space. So one of the reasons why I started taking, a studio portraits was because of literally the relationship of the body within queer culture and how it had been represented. So if we think about the work of Mapplethorpe, who did do studio photographs, but I'm thinking about like outside the studio in a certain way, or Nan Golden, or even thinking about Wolfgang Tillman and Jack Pearson, who are my contemporaries. It was about creating a moment in a community of using the body as also a site of architecture. And so using Holbein as a way of talking about kind of my own royal family and what it means to be able to be with a portrait that you just want to spend time with, kind of what Carol said, that you look at it and then you look away from it. But that formality of what portraiture did was a way for me to validate my own community. And that was the gesture that I went to, because I felt like photographing them in their homes and their living rooms and what was being done in photography at that period of time in the late 80s and 90s wasn't how I wanted to represent my own community. So bodies floating in these colors or in this black space, when I switched to black, it was about kind of my own aging and the meditative place and the subconscious, and this other kind of idea that the body is floating within a void, or what is the void of a black space, and how do we think about that, and where do we, color activates the body in a certain way, but the black space does this whole other thing. But it's always within the formality of the history of painting that my portraiture comes out of. And in fact, comes down on October 27th, but I have an exhibition of a lifetime right now. And I made a little film and put it on Instagram, but in Sao Paulo at MASPI, they put 21 of their old master paintings with 64 of my portraits. And it is really, it's like literally Titian and one of mine, Holbein and one of mine. We're talking like everybody you can imagine. It's like you open the show and it's Rembrandt and then me, and you're just like, whoa. But one of the things that happened and in this exhibition for me, and I actually cried at my own work, which I've never been emotional really about my work, but this exhibition brought home to me because I felt for a moment that it could fall flat, that this could be an utter failure, because how dare am I as a photographer to end up putting myself with these kinds of paintings, this position of art. I'm not trying to say that I'm this kind of artist, but it wasn't actually my imagination of the exhibition. It was the curators who dreamed of this and came to it with me. And then it gave me the permission to think that I could actually hang with these paintings. And then what happened was the utter relationship to humanity and queerness and every human being came out because of that's, at the end of the day, what the work is really trying to do. So the isolation is to remember that we are like either individuals or within community, but that we're also often isolated within our own, silos. But that at the same time, you are faced with this portrait that can grow in so many different ways over time, that I hope that it is different every time you come to it. And I like that about portraits. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but
well, it was the start of it.
It was long.
Kathy, we're going to move the questions and the conversation into this remarkable exhibition. But for now, please give it up for the amazing Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine and Charlotte, for that incredibly meaningful and interesting conversation. I feel like we've just gotten started in understanding where we're going, and I'm really excited to go and see the exhibition across the hall in just a moment. I am Allison Hall-Mosé and a member of the class of 1984, Davidson 1984. I'm also in my 5th year as the chair of the board, and would like to say that's thanks to Carol Quillen when she was the president and I became the chair. And now I've had the privilege and honor to serve now under President Hicks as well. But because of this position, I had the privilege, the honor and the privilege to be in LA in Catherine's studio when we had the photography shoot for the presidential portrait. And the walls, windows, and blood in the Vatican was on the floor of the studio. And it really gave me a chance to see personally what this broad talent is doing. And I know it was just a moment in time and a scratch on the surface, but it was truly for me one of the most memorable experiences. Clearly, I mean, one of the special privileges of a liberal arts education is the opportunity for our students to have an opportunity to meet Catherine Opie and to hear the perspectives that you bring to this art and to this world, and Charlotte, you as well. It has been a profound experience for me in my leadership to not only have been a student and had my own experiences, as many are in this room today, but how it has continued to be an experience for me. And it feels like such a gift to have the chance to come, because it's a reminder, an event like this is a reminder that it is the chance to learn from each other, to be connected, to hear and understand where we all are. And I really appreciated the students who stood up and asked those really thoughtful questions, because you are at the forefront of the future for us. And we're very, very blessed to have you here, learning in this environment. So thank you so much. In closing, I really would like to thank the sponsors of this program, and there are quite a few of them. The Public Lectures Committee, the Herb Jackson and Laura Grosch Gallery Endowment, the Davidson College Friends of the Arts, the Charles N. Williamson Fund, the Department of Art, and the Humanities Department. So again, let's put our hands together and thank you for Catherine and Charlotte. We'll look forward to seeing all of you over at the Visual Arts Center across the street shortly. So thank you.